We're going to read Pei Aleph Halacha Beis. Givinish shenasu mecholov behaimos. If you made cheese from milk from a kosher cow, the nimsa treifa, and later on you found out the animal was a treifa, so now we have the following. So we had already saw in Halacha Aleph that an animal that's a treifa, its milk is treif. This is the first time we're hearing sort of between the lines that the milk from an animal that's kosher is kosher. So the Mechaber can tell us what we should do is imhu treifa she'efshar shelo irba el ata or she'ir ba'ata v'yika, whatever. It happened. If we could tell that the treifos is something that could have happened in the past couple of days, going nikiv krum shamleach has a hole in the lining of its brain, and it's moted. We assume that the animal became a treifa very recently. Maybe that treifos happened 10 minutes ago, and I milked the cow yesterday, so I assume it happened later. If you see the treifos as a kind that obviously happened before you milked the cow, kagon, Yiseris Aver, it has an extra limb. Okay, the extra limb didn't grow 10 minutes ago. The extra limb has been there forever. So that was there even before you milked it. Oi, hugla piyamake. It has a kind of a mark, and it already has a scab on top of it. You know that mark was there for a long time. It's been there for so long that it has this good scab on top of it. Then all the goodness that were made with that are asur. And the Ramah says, this good scab only means that it's been there for a couple of days. So for the past 3 days, you have to assume that milk was made when it was a treifa. What's made beforehand was mutter, because maybe it didn't have the mark before, and I'll be a seris. If it had extra limbs, or shar treifos, habom and abeten, other treifos from within the stomach, mashnasim menami orum asur, it's always asur. Okay, I'm going to continue in a second, the Mechaber, there's more to read still. But just two things to point out. One is that Rabbi Eismach had asked some time back, which is really Tosfos' kasha. He asked, how come when we have a drasha that milk is mutter and some milk is asur, so we have milk of a gomel is asur and milk from a kosher animal is kosher, how do we know where to put milk from a treifa? Okay, we're saying milk from a treifa is like milk from a gomel. Why don't we say that milk from a treifa should be like milk from a kosher animal? It really comes from a kosher animal. So Tosfos talks about it. It's Tosfos in Shulchan. He explains how we make the drashas to work out in the right way. Pri Megadim brings from a different Gemara. The Gemara makes a chiluk that will help us understand this, which is the Gemara says that the milk from a kosher animal, the potential issue revolves around Eivim and Achai. And that issur is an issur that can come off. When you shech the animal will become kosher. So the fact that it came out of an animal it's coming from an animal it is treif. I mean, right now you can't eat the animal, it's Eivim and Achai, but that's a kind of a treif that can come off. It's an issur that can go off. So when the Torah was matter milk from a regular cow, we understand that milk from a treifa goes with the gomel side, not with the kosher animal side. Because gomel is a kind of an issur that never goes off. If it's a gomel, it's never going to become kosher. So treifa is more like a gomel because treifa doesn't become mutter later on. If it's a treifa, it's a treifa. So that's why if we have to put treifa on one side of the equation, we put treifa with the gomel milk rather than with the kosher milk. That's one thing. The second thing is the Mechaber had said. Everyone said here, if we have a treifos that could have happened a few minutes ago, then we assume it happened 5 minutes ago instead of thinking it happened a week ago. Okay? That's because of the Kashrus. The animal has the Kashrus. Actually, we'll talk about the Kashrus later. I'm going to remind you, that when we learned Hilchos Teraifos, we sent over a placey who says that there's a chiluk. In Hilchos Teraifos, we do not say anything has a Kashrus. Which is to say, in Hilchos Teraifos, the din is that if a bug comes onto a fruit when it's on the tree, that bug is also no matter what. If the bug comes onto the fruit after it leaves the tree, then it doesn't become usher unless it walks on the ground. It's not usher right away. So the place he says over there, if you're mesupik, you don't know where the bug came on, we say the bug came on when it was on the ground. We don't say there's a cheskes kashrus, that the fruit has a cheskes kashrus, to say, why don't we assume the minute the fruit came out, had no bugs on it? And why don't we say that it had a cheskes kashrus and the bug came on as late as possible? So we said over there, the place is machalik, that the difference is, because over there, there's a cheskes kashrus on the fruit. But we're not dining on the fruit, we're dining on the bug. Okay? The bug is what is potentially mutter rasser. So the chesed kashrus of the fruit has nothing to do with anything. The fruit state is still mutter. The fruit had a chesed kashrus or remains kashrus. The question is the bug that's on there. The bug has no chesed kashrus. In our case, the shaila is on the cow or the milk, and that has a chesed kashrus because when it was born it was kosher. Okay. Let me keep on reading a little more, and then we'll get to what we really want to talk about. What happens if this cow was part of a corral full of a lot of animals? Then it's arba, chelba, and cholba acheres, and now the milk from this first cow, which is, well, you know it's a treifa, got mixed in with all the milk from all the other cows. Then the milk has to be built to b'shishim because it's min b'mina lach b'lach, so it has to be built to b'shishim, and therefore it has to be built to b'shishim. So it depends how many cows you had. If there was shishim or there was not shishim. And the Ramah it's on if you have 60 cows in the corral, and you don't really know how much milk each cow gives. Some cows give more or less. So then you could say, so you don't really know if it's shishim, it's close. So I'm reading shishim. So you assume that each cow gives an average amount of milk, an equal amount of milk, and therefore you assume that each cow, let's say, gives 2 gallons at a milking, which is about right. It gives about 2 gallons at a milking, and so if there's 60 other cows, we assume that it's batal b'shisha. You don't say that maybe mine gave 2.5 gallons this time. If mine gave 2.5 gallons, it's not going to be batal. We assume they all give barach the same, and it's mutter. Okay, I'm almost finished. It's a long shulchan.
I'm not saying it's just really a suffix shulchan. I mean, it's not going to give exactly. Each not going to give exactly a certain amount. So if this gives more or less than the it should be like a suffix shulchan.
Right. So the reason is going to be because for the shishim is only midrabanan, and the teraifos are not for sure either. That's what it has to do. Okay. They say like this. All this is true if the milk got mixed up when it was in liquid form. If they had already made them into cheese, and now we find out that there was one cheese made from this cow, and cheese made from other cows, meaning not that you put the milk together and then made a lot of cheese from it all. Each cow made its own cheese. You made cheese from each cow's own milk, and then as the blocks of cheese got mixed up, then ainun betelis, they're not bottled. Why? They have a chaticha rulis kabi. The block of cheese is a chaticha rulis kabi. I feel the alpha bottle, so it can't be bottled. So the one block of cheese couldn't be bottled into 100 even, or 1,000, and it wouldn't be bottled. Okay. Last part of the chaber.
Each block of cheese is made from a separate cow.
Right. Had been made originally in a way that we knew it was usher. Yeah. So then this block was usher, and now this block got mixed into many other blocks, then it would be chaticha rulis kabi. The last chaber on my part, the nitrified de sircha. What happens if the way that behaim became a treifa was that it had a sircha, it had some kind of a lesion on its lungs, okay, which is a specific kind of treifos. We don't. That's not a reason to make the milk usher. Mishum to have a svek because it's a svek. So if this milk came from that animal, and so if it's a treifos altogether, as we're going to talk about today, sirchas is not such a thing that we're so sure that they're treifos altogether. Some people say that even if it has a sircha, it's asur. What's been milked in the past 3 days is asur, because it's enough. We're convinced enough that it's asur that we're going to asur if it's in the last few days. That's what you should do. If not for hefsem meruba, you should assume that it's asur. Okay. So, you have to read all that. Okay. There's 2 questions to talk about. Out in this is where we first had that, we had it in Kufta as well, but first in this simon, that we had that milk from a kosher animal is kosher. Okay? And there's an obvious question. And we're going to talk about 2 today, about one shaila, about the way we have milk nowadays, and next time about a different shaila, about whether milk that we have nowadays is really kosher. And that is as follows. The simple question to start us off is that the Mechaber tells us, kept on telling us that if the animals are treifa, then the milk is no good. Okay, so how can we drink the milk if no one has X-ray vision to know whether the animals are treifa? How are we supposed to know? So if it had an extra limb, that was one of the cases. Okay, you could see that from the outside. But most of the treifas are internal. How would anybody know if the animal is a treifa or not? How is anyone supposed to know whether he's looking at an animal as a treifa? So the Gemara talks about that. But that's just our starting point for the question. The Gemara says, "Roy behaimos ainun teraifos." When we look at the animal, we have an assumption the animal is not a treifa, and therefore we follow the roy, and the animal is not a treifa. So our Shulchan talked all about when we knew that the animal was a treifa. Lamaisa they milked the cow, and an hour later they shechted it, and they found out it was a teraifos. But if we didn't know, we followed roy behaimos and teraifos. Okay, so the shaila for today is that really true? Okay, is it really true that roy behaimos ain't in teraifos? Okay, and to start us, I'll tell you, I guess the person who's shechita would take care. Yaakov was I said to him, tell me what's the percentages of kasher and treif that you see when you're shechting? So he says, okay, I'll tell you what's doing. He says, we just did shechita. This is whenever he told this to me some time back. He says to me, today when we did our cattle shechita, we got 43% kasher out of our shechita. He says, and we do lambs, we tend to get 65% kasher. That's more than right. 43% is less than right. He says, it has very much to do with how they raise cattle nowadays. He told me three things that he sees that it depends on. What they feed them, including, go figure, how many thorns are in, how much thorns are in the feed. I don't know what that means. It sounds strange. But anyhow, how they feed them, how much room they give them to move around in the feed yard, and the hormones. Okay, and so now he, as a person who buys meat to shech that he wants people to eat, he knows how to pick out animals that are going to have less teraifos. And he knows which farms raise their animals in a way that they're going to be less teraifos. Okay, so he's selective in how he picks out his cat. He knows if it depends on how much space they have in the corral, he walks into the farm, sees how much room they have, and says, I'm going to buy from you or I'm not going to buy from you. He's more intelligent to know what he's supposed to buy.
43% kosher doesn't mean 57% treif. A lot of it could be suffix treif.
Right, that's what we're going to talk about those seconds. But I'm saying is that even he's getting a certain percentage of kosher. It's because he's selective. Because he goes to farms and he buys the right animals that he understands what makes it treif. That is to say, that's when he's buying animals to shech, to turn into beef, to be kosher beef. But the farmer who's taking care of cows for milk, he's not looking around for animals that are fed the right way and treated this way that are make them less treifos. In other words, a kosher slaughterhouse buys cattle that they think are going to have less teraifos to them. How do they know? They know based on experience who feeds their animals better and who most v'chaim.
Maybe the cows that raise some milk are raised in a way that's better for them.
Right. Okay. So then I'm getting it. Okay. And Yaakov was what I said. He said animals that are over 30 months old, animals that are more than 30 months old are hopeless. He said they'll get 25% kosher out of them. He said the mouse is hopeless. They try to shech young animals. Anything over 30 months old is like hopeless. And that last point is very significant for us because it's true. It's true that the cows that they milk are not the same as the cows that they shech. I mean, eventually they shech the milking cows also, but it's not the same kind of cattle. It's true, but cows don't give birth until they're in their second year. Okay, so if animals that are over 30, they don't have milk until they give birth.
Is he shechting? Not just him, but
people.
Mostly bulls, mostly males.
I believe so.
So wherever you're gonna, all right. So
well, we have no reason to think that the men or the ladies are more or less healthy than each other. Okay, it happens to be. I don't know. If it'll make you feel better.
About thorns, it makes greater, longevity.
It makes you feel better. It makes you feel better. Some shechtim once shechted cows that were meant for milking. Very, very young ones, really very young ones, and had a horrible percentage of teraifos in them. They're horrible. Okay, but you have to realize what you're saying. He gets a tolerable level of teraifos, and he chooses selectively, and he chooses young animals. Cows that are for milking, as they get older, they have more and more teraifos. He tells you that. Everybody tells you that. Dr. Levenger had a study like 30 years ago of animals, and he showed how as they got older, they had more teraifos, which is logical. So they don't milk cows until they're in their second or third year. They milk till they're 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. That's how cows won't. So the teraifos is getting worse and worse and worse. Okay, and no one's paying any attention. No one cares. As long as the cow makes it, fine. When he's finished, he turns into salami. As long as he makes it, that's all he makes it for. Okay, they're not the shard. Even you should know. Even the kosher slaughterhouses don't only take animals that are not going to have teraifos. Sometimes it's kedai to take the ones that have a lower percentage because it makes sense. It just works out. It's so much cheaper to buy from there that's kedai to have the amount of percentage of teraifos. Okay, fine. Okay, so this shaila, that roy behaimos maybe roy behaimos are really teraifos. We're not the first ones to think of this shaila. Okay, this shaila has been around as long as the Gemara says that the roy behaimos are not teraifos. People were asking Kashrus on this. It's the get. So it's going to get to Arden, it's going to get to two other places that I know of, and even those places talk about it. One is back in Siman Lamates, where it says, what happens if you lost the animal's lungs? Okay, if you couldn't check it for trade, you couldn't check sirchus. So the thing is that the animal's kosher, Well, so let me say that. Under many circumstances, the animal is kosher. So over there, plus can talk about, should that be true? Should that be true nowadays when behaimos are not teraifos? You can't check it, that's in Simon test. And again, in Orchaim, the din is that you can only shech an animal on Yom Tif because of the assumption that the animal you're going to get, after you shecht it, you're going to be able to eat the meat. Okay, because it's going to be kosher afterwards. Or else it will be until Shama for no purpose. So, over the place can talk about there also that that's based on roy behaimos and teraifos. And there they talk about also, is it really true that roy behaimos are not teraifos? And could you really shecht animals when we know that the animals are going to end up being teraifos? Okay, I'll mention some names that people talk about it. There's Simcha Chadash and Lametes, and the Pri Chadash and Lametes. There's a Tshuva in the Mishkalas Yaakov, and the Shagzari, and it's Pharisee, I'm going to tell you about it in a while, and others. Okay. So the short answer to the question is what Rabbi said. That's the short answer. And the short answer is that most of the things that we consider to be teraifos are not really teraifos anyhow. Most of the circles that we ask are not really teraifos anyhow, which is merumas at the end of our din. What the Machaber is talking about at the end of the din, that sirchas are, which is what we look for, sirchas are things that are only a suffix teraifos anyhow. We're not really convinced that if we have a sircha in an animal that's really a treifa, so it's merumas here at the end of the din, and therefore it's all just a chumrah anyhow, and therefore it's mutter. Okay? So,
did anybody translate this into Hilchos B'dikas Harayah? Well, if anything is going to be not treif, it's got to be this little circa over here.
Okay, I'm going to say your question a different way. I'm going to say your question a different way. Okay, which is what we need to understand is, what do you mean to say that? Well, most of the animals are kosher anyhow. Okay, what are we trying to say by that? What I say is, think about it in the Orchaim case. That's like, to me, the strongest case. Okay, think about the case in Orchaim. It says you're allowed to shecht an animal because roy of the animals are going to be kosher. Okay, but Lamaisa, when you shecht the animal, what's going to happen? 7 out of 10 are going to be treif. 7 out of 10 you're not going to be able to eat. So what does it help you that you say, roy of the behaimos are not kosher? No, roy of the behaimos I'm not going to be able to eat it. I'm shechting the animal for no purpose. When I shecht this animal on Yom Tif, what's going to happen? I'm going to shecht the animal, I'm going to open it up and say, sorry, can't eat this one. Most of the time, that's what's going to happen. Okay, so how do we really say that roy behaimos really are kosher anyhow? So you could pretend that in Simon Lamates. Okay, and you're asking from a different angle.
The shchit is the worst question because I don't care if I'll pee Allah, it's mutter. If I can't eat it, I can't eat it.
Right.
That's
right.
The worst.
And what you're saying is, let us use this to teach us that we shouldn't be so makbid on our teraifos also. Okay? Yeah. Maybe I'll answer that question again. I'm not sure if I can answer that question. I'm not sure I can answer my question either. But let's just to understand this thing better. Okay, so I have, there was a sefer. You asked about whether, how common it is even in dairy cows and whatever. There's a sefer. I don't remember who it's from. I saw it brought down in one of the places. Maybe it was in the Piskach over here. I looked at the sefer. It's called Kisei Eliyahu. It was printed about 200 years ago. He says in his day, 90% of the animals were teraifos. Okay, that's what he said. Okay, so he talks about the shaila. Could you say roy behaimos teraifos and 90% of the animals were teraifos? If I remember, I don't have it here right in front of me. If I remember, it was a Chassan Sofer who talked about a shochet. He says by them usually it was 75% of the animals were teraifos. He wanted to know what happens if they have a shochet who was getting less than that. Okay, then they were bothered that he was getting so less teraifos that it maybe look bad about him that he was only getting, I'll make up a number, 60% teraifos, because something's wrong about him. Like that was like a normal amount of how much you shecht. Okay, so I see three different ways of answering this question.
When we're dealing with these percentages, why are you limiting it to what we're shechting? Why don't we just, can we use like the road cows?
So people said that. They said, well, we only shecht 100 animals a week. Of all the tens of thousands of animals, maybe it's worse. But the problem is that we consistently, maybe it's better. Better. The problem is that we consistently find that. It's not like it was a one-time thing that the Rosenblatt did a shechita and that was a one-time they found like that. It's all the time. It's continuous. He's always following that. So you think that all the teraifos go to Rosenblatt and everybody else gets the kosher animal? I mean, why would we think that?
If somebody found a better percentage, they would know about a real fast in the sheep industry and get a hold of those animals. It's such a...
Worldwide we're talking about.
But worldwide, and it's worldwide the same problem. Look at Dr. Levinger's statistics. You'll see. Now, you should know, he has a very interesting thing in his statistics. He shows how in different countries were different ways, and Eretz Yisrael had a really, really low percentage of teraifos. And he writes about it. He says it's because we're in such, financially, it's such a big expense to have a treif animal that we're really, really makel about these things. Everything's a shatz of tak, and we're makel about a lot of things. That's what he says. Okay? So anyhow, but he shows in other countries it's not like that. And all over the world, that's considered normal. That shechita has these high percentages. When they shech down, they find teraifos. So one time doesn't prove anything, but if it's consistent, it sort of gives you that feeling that that's what's going on. You know? Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. The following is a sort of a conjecture. Okay, how did Chazal know that roy behaimos are not teraifos? How did they know that? Where did they come up with that rule from? Do you think that they took a poll of veterinarians, or they did a lot of shechitas and they decided that roy behaimos are teraifos? Okay, now I know that they didn't do that. Okay, because if that's what it would be based on, then it would be very, it would change from day to day. Today it would be true, but in 100 years from now it wouldn't be. We wouldn't write a din based on that. Maybe in next year it's going to be not like that. Like what would happen to us? We think roy behaimos are teraifos. So where they come up with the rule that it's a rule that's for real. I mean, we said 3 dinim that are based on that. But where did they come up with that? It's hard to believe that they did that based on a survey of sheikhtim, and they asked all the guys in the neighborhood, what do they think, and they made up a din for that. What do you think, Rabbi?
No, go on.
Okay, so I think the answer is, it looks like he has something to say. Okay, but I think the answer is, we have a rule. Okay, a behemoth that's a treifa is not going to live for 12 months. We have a rule that a behemoth who's not a treifa can't become pregnant and give birth. It has to do both of them. But it can't become pregnant and give birth if it's a treifa. Okay, so if you have milk from cows, guess what? That means is that cow became pregnant and gave birth, or else you wouldn't have any milk. Okay, and if you have any cows, that means is it gave birth because you have to be born from somebody else. Okay, if we have cows don't die after 12 months. You look around, cows are not dying after 6 months. They're living long lives. Now, they used to live much longer, but that's its own thing. But they're living years and years, right? So we don't use the rule of 12 months to tell us whether it's a vade treifa. Even if it lives 12 months, it doesn't mean anything. We don't use that to prove to us that the animal's kosher. But when we have the suffix treifas, or the shachas, even if we have a machlokas at poiskim about treifas, if the animal lives 12 months or it becomes pregnant and gives birth, then that animal's kosher. Those rules still apply, and they tell us that the animal's kosher. So when you look around, you say, no one ever shechted a cat. Okay, but do you think cats are treifas? So we'd say, no, cats are not treifas, because why? Because cats are living for years and years, and cats are giving birth, and we're saying they're living in the way that makes sense for an animal that's not a treifa. So we could think without ever shechting a cat, and ever looking inside of its lungs, we know that most cats are not treifas. Okay, so the rule's coming from the rule's coming from a hashara. The Rabbi Chanan, we'll talk more about Rabbi Chanan next time. There's Rabbi Chanan about this, who says that these kind of roivs are based on an understanding of nature rather than surveys. Okay, they're not they're logical, based on how we understand things, not based on, let's count up all the people who do this, and all the people who do this, and then make a cheshbon based on it. Okay, so, that is to say that that same way that Chazal came to that decision that roy behaimos are not treifas, it's just as true for us. We're not that we have to make up the roy. The same logic that they came to it, however they logically came to that, we would come to the same thing. So that means to say, so...
That's for shechting all the cows in all treif, or is it?
So...
if they're living more than 12...
No, so
they're giving birth, right, and having milk, and we're still finding them there.
So that tells us that the things that we're considering treif are really kosher. Now, we don't know which one. When the animal's in front of us, we can't say this is the kosher one. We don't know if this is the kosher one. Maybe this is the treif one. Maybe that's the treif one. Maybe that's the treif one. We don't know. Okay, so Yossi says, well, let's go. Let's keep on doing this and taking pictures, and we'll watch it, and then we'll figure out which were the closest to being kosher, and we'll let those off though. Okay, but we're not ready for that yet. But we get the feeling. We look at them and say, what can I do? The animal's treif. That's what I consider to be treif. But deep down, I know that they're really kosher. I really know that most of the animals are kosher. I can't eat this one, but I know that they're really kosher. Okay, or you could say a variation of what I just said is, the Gemara says that milk is kosher based on a pasuk. Okay, so maybe Chazal weren't so smart to make their own decision that roy behaimos are treifas, but if the Torah said you could drink milk, then the Torah is telling us that roy behaimos are not treifas. The Torah says you could drink milk. The Torah doesn't say drink milk after you shech the cow. That's not what you're supposed to do. Every time you want a cup of milk, shech the cow first. That's not what you're supposed to do. So, okay, second is, okay, in a modern dairy, okay, nowadays when they shech cows, it's not 7:30. Don't worry. When they shech cows, when they milk cows, cows become pregnant approximately, they milk cows and they become pregnant every 12 to 14 months. Okay? Usually it's 12, some people stretch it to 14 months. Okay? The sort of the rule is they dry up a cow after 300 days. Okay? That's what I'm getting to understand. They dry up a cow after 300 days. So, that means is, when you have milk, that means you have milk, that milk came from a cow that gave birth less than 300 days ago. Right? The milk in my cup is from a cow that gave birth less than 300 days ago. That means is, cows are pregnant for 9 months, so that means is that the cow that this came from a year and a half ago had a Cheskas Kashrus. Right? Because how do I know that? Because after a certain time back, a year and a half ago, it became pregnant and gave birth, and that's why I have a cup of milk in my hand. Okay, so that means is, forget about that there's a roiv. Forget about that there's roiv behaimos and not teraifos. Behaimos have a Cheskas Kashrus. The milk that I'm coming from comes from cows that all have the Cheskas Kashrus. I can track it back. We don't get milk except from cows that gave birth. Okay, so we can track back to a Cheskas Kashrus that the animal is really kosher. Okay, so we don't have to be matzah because of roiv behaimos teraifos. Maybe there is no roiv, but there's a Cheskas Kashrus on the animal. Okay, so
Scott is right after he gave birth.
therefore what?
So you don't have a year.
No, it doesn't have to live for a year. An animal just has to become pregnant and give birth, and that means it's not teraifos. That's not teraifos. So if it became pregnant and gave birth, there's milk because it gave birth. That means it's 9 months ago or 15 months ago, we know it was kosher. If we know it was kosher then, it has a Cheskas Kashrus from then. You want to say maybe it's a teraifos. I don't have to have a roiv anymore. Now I have to have a chazakah.
So, I just wonder if that Cheskas Kashrus could last the next 7 years.
It can last forever.
Right.
It can keep on going. Right. Once I get it once.
Not Dafka because it's...
Not for this guy. No, I don't mean because of this year. I mean, we know once that it did that. If it did it once, it had a Cheskas Kashrus from that day, and I go, so now.
That's why the wine is right.
So, very good question. I'm getting to that in a second. Very good question. I didn't make up this idea of the chazak. I'm getting to that. So the answer is, the reason why what I'm saying is seems to be wrong is Taisus and Chulun. Yes, that kasha. Taisus and Chulun says, there's a chazaka. Animals have a Cheskas Kashrus. Because of exactly this question. Taisus right down the Gemara, it says that roiv behaimos are not teraifos. Taisus talks about this. Why do they say they have a Cheskas Kashrus? And Taisus says, no, a chazaka has to be mivurur. A chazaka has to be that there was a time that I knew the animal was kosher. Now, I don't know the animal was kosher. I retroactively know the animal is kosher. Chazaka doesn't work retroactively. A chazaka has to be today I could look at the animal and say, this animal is kosher. I know that today you're kosher. And if I know you're kosher today, then you have a Cheskas Kashrus for tomorrow also. But if I have an animal that I'm going to, now I can find out that last year it had a Cheskas Kashrus, that doesn't work. Okay, that's what Taisus says. And that's why chazaka doesn't work, the Gemara needs a roiv. Now, there are those who argue, but let's go with what Taisus says. But the first he says like this. He says, that was only, what Taisus only said is true, before there was a roiv behaimos and teraifos. But now that we have a roiv that is roiv behaimos or ainun teraifos, and we know that sirchas develop as the animal gets older, as the animal gets older and older, it gets more and more sirchas, now we have a chazaka that was mevurur. Because on the day the animal was born, the animal had a Cheskas Kashrus. Now we do have roiv behaimos and teraifos. So he's talking about why do we need that roiv? But now we have a roiv. The roiv behaimos are ainun teraifos. And we know that I receive not like that. Well, that's because as they get older, they get more and more sirchas. So on the day the animal was born, did we know that the animal was kosher? Yeah, on that day the animal was kosher. So now we have a Cheskas Kashrus. Now we have an animal. We're not going to be matzah the milk because roiv behaimos ainun teraifos. Roiv will help us create a chazaka. Now we have a Cheskas Kashrus. The animal has a Cheskas Kashrus. I see lots of animals that are treif. That's very nice. Most animals are treif, but my animal has a Cheskas Kashrus. So therefore, we could be matzah the milk. The roiv helps us in creating a chazaka that even Taisus would agree to. Even Taisus. Now others hold you don't have to have a chazaka that was mavurur. But even according to Taisus, that it has to be a chazaka that was mavurur. We don't. The Teraifos says, don't worry about that. The chazaka when the animal was born, the day he was born, he had a Cheskas Kashrus. So now we could be matzah from the chazaka, not from the roiv.
What do we need this for?
We're trying to say, roiv from the animals that I shecht are not kosher. So if I only eat the milk because roiv animals are kosher, but there's no roiv anymore. So we're saying yes.
Because it's all bonus.
So we're saying so you're right. This answer is not within that range. You're right. I'm sorry. You're right. He's saying is then okay. I have to tell you one more point. Teraifos says we could say then also we have a problem now. Okay, we have a roiv that tells us the animals are not kosher. If it would be 50-50, we could use a Cheskas Kashrus. If we have roiv animals being not kosher, we would have a problem. We would say roiv would tell us that it's treif, not that it's kosher. To which he says, we'll say smach mutu l'chazaka. Okay, the meat of animals are not kosher, and the chazaka will matter us. But you're right. It doesn't. We don't need the fact that it's only a churban. This is not dependent on that answer. The roiv animals are not.
He's saying there's another answer.
Yes, I didn't realize that. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Change it up. Okay. Last, and this might answer what question he asked before him is Kenzain that when there was a time, in days of the Gemara, most animals were not teraifos. They shecht the animals not teraifos. And as the Poskim told us, nowadays it's just, we have lots of chumras. Okay, what does that mean that we have lots of chumras? It means is that there was once, they opened up an animal, and they looked at the sircha, and people said, that looks kosher. I think that's kosher. That thing, don't worry about that. And other people said, I'm not so convinced anymore. I'm not really so sure. Maybe people make mistakes. And they started over time. This didn't happen it wasn't like a switch. They flipped the switch one day. But over time, people started becoming more and more machmir about these things and saying, I'm not so sure about that one. That one is mutter. But this one, I'm not so sure anymore. And things moved away from what was really the din. In other words, if we take sirchas that we have now, and we show them to Abai and Rava, they would have laughed at us. They said, of course there's a mutter. It would be a joke to them. Of course that would be mutter. But to us, over the years, we've slowly, the things just inched worse and worse, to the point that things that we even think that are for sure usher, would have been really our for sure mutter. We just getting used to these things over the generations, and that's what happened. So Kenzain, that all those chumras as they developed, were only chumras that were for things where you can make a choice. You have an animal, you shecht an animal, in front of you is an animal, you have a choice, should I eat it or should I not eat it? So you ask the Rav, what should you do? He looks and he says, you know what? It's probably mutter, it's better off not eating this one. Pick the next animal. Okay, so it was a choice within when we have a choice. Is this one better or is this one better? Pick the one that doesn't have that. Okay? But when we have things that we don't have a choice about, you shecht on Yontif. I tell you, you can only shecht once when you have, without any of these shaylos. I won't be able to shecht at all on Yontif. Or when you say I can only milk cows from when I'll know for sure, then I'm out of milk. There won't be any such thing anymore. In those cases, they weren't machmir. And there's two makaris. So one is the Shagasari almost says this. He really sort of says this. Towards the beginning of the tshuva, he says that even though in practice we're going to treat many of these animals as teraifos, but he says, but that's only because when we're standing in front of the animal, should we eat the animal, should we not eat the animal, we choose to not eat the animal, we choose to be more machmir. But when that decision will mean that we can't do something b'chlal, okay, we won't be able to shecht the yontif at all, that much we're not machmir for those dinim. So these chumras are only partial chumras, like we're machmir when we can. Okay, so for milk, it's even stronger. For milk, we have no choice. If we're going to be machmir like these things, we won't be able to drink any milk. I mean, we'll never have a cup of milk because it'll never be possible unless you shut the animal immediately. You won't be able to drink it. So for those things, the chumras only went so far. Okay, so even though when you look at the animal, you won't eat it, but when it comes to things that we have no choices, we take it we take by the ikar, so to speak, the ikar din that we know most of them are not teraifos. Okay, now the Shagas Ari, I'm going to be honest with you, the Shagas Ari later in the tshuva goes back on this. Later in the tshuva, he's not so happy about this. But Ken Zayin, I think he doesn't say this, but I wonder if he's only doing that because he's talking about shchit on yontif. That's what his tshuva is about. Shchit on yontif. Shchit on yontif is not exactly the same as milk. Shchit on yontif, you do have a choice. You can eat shech beforehand, or you could eat not meat. You could shech the animal tomorrow. It's saying you don't have a choice to shech today, but
it's also a lot worse.
Because
if a puddle, you're not going to eat it. Let's say I shech my animal, I decided, and I know that if the animal has a growth on its thing, or whatever, that the medical community says it's not healthy to eat now, but it's not treif, and you're not going to eat it, and people don't eat it, and 90% have it, you got a problem.
You think because of the mice, I'm not going to eat it?
If the mice don't put it,
I hear that. I don't know what the Shagasari says, but it could be it's that. I'm saying from a different angle. I'm saying is that the doichat, so to speak, the being cut off completely is not really so true. So I can shech today, I'll shech tomorrow, or I'll shech yesterday, and I'll save the meat for today. But you can take your way, because the mice, I'm not going to eat it. When it comes to milk, or it comes to dinner lamates, I lost the lungs. Okay, I lost the lungs. Now what am I supposed to do? So you tell me, only take the animal who you checked it and you made sure it didn't have these teraifos. Well, what am I supposed to do? I don't have lungs to check. So in that case, it's sort of like, I don't want to say that it's a shasatak. It's like the chumrah is only said for cases when you have a choice. Say, pick this one instead of that. Well, that's what they said it for. Okay, we saw it also, I'm seeing here also. The Taz says it also by Shchita, he also talks about like that. And we talked about it, actually had to do a similar test about checking frozen blackberries and raspberries, also a similar thing, that sometimes Chacham's requirements are only when it's possible, and not when it became impossible. Okay, so we're finished for this part. Okay, so again, back to the short answer was that the reason why we assume roy behaimos are not teraifos is because those dinim are chumras. Okay, most of those things that we consider to be not teraifos are chumras. It's merumas here in our din that most of those things are really chumras. And even though we wouldn't eat the cow, somehow we could eat the milk anyhow. Okay, that was for today's. In Rosh Hashem for next time, it's a different shaila. some of you probably know more about. A different chat about whether we could eat looking at it.